Hi, welcome back to part 2, take 2. Got myself in a bit of a mess there, so I thought I'd redo it. I'd only done a couple of minutes. So I was just finishing off with the what the logical form of a transcendental argument was. You know, we've got X, that's the thing everybody agrees on, and we're trying to show, normally by a reductio ad absurdum, that implies that Y, which is the contested proposition, is a precondition or is presupposed if you accept X. And it's often done with what's called the reductio ad absurdum, which is just Latin for reducing to absurdity. So if you propose, if you want to deny, for example, you want to deny that Y is the case, and then you show the absurd effects that has, which makes it impossible for you to say that you believe X. So they're often the way transcendental arguments work. It's often through that reductio approach. And one of the to say that more formally, this was if I move that out of the way, then I'll be able to not look down so much. So this was, for example, F Strawson's very famous argument that we mentioned in a previous video, which was he was this was part of his, is that in 1959? I think that is, isn't it? His Individuals, his book called Individuals, and he was somebody that reintroduced in many ways transcendental arguments into the modern philosophical landscape, and it has since been picked up by quite a few analytical philosophers, or particularly interesting analytical philosophers like people like Searle, and there was McDowell with his Mind and World, Austin, Ryle, some of those guys who have used, Wittgenstein obviously used transcendental arguments, and you can see that they're trying to do something very different than, say, what the logical positivists were doing. Their argument, and the structure of their arguments are very different, and they're not using empirical premises or arguing about an empirical interpretation of nature or dealing with evidence in that sort of systematic, narrow way. You're talking about something different, you're talking about concepts. So, for example, Strawson's statement of his argument here is, there is no doubt that we have the idea of a single spatio-temporal system, i.e. space-time, of system of material things. The idea of every material thing at any time being spatially related in various ways at various times to every other at every time. He's saying there is no doubt at all that this is our conceptual scheme. So he's just saying we are assuming that there's objects in space and time, and that those things are unique, they're separate, and they're related through to other things. He's saying that is our conceptual scheme. He said there's no doubt at all that this is our conceptual scheme. Okay, so that's, if you like, that's the X. And now his Y is, now I say that a condition of our having this conceptual scheme is the unquestioning acceptance of particular identity in at least some cases of non-continuous observation. So that's his Y, and just trying to clarify what he means by that Y is that people are, we presented the argument that how do you know that the particular alarm clock and the particular bed, when you're not looking at something and you go to sleep, how do you know that somebody didn't come in the middle of the night and just change all your bedroom furniture with stuff that looks just like your bedroom furniture that you had before you went to sleep? And he's actually, and so there is no way that you can, unless you were awake the entire night and you were looking at all those bits of furniture, there'd be no way that you could say that definitely didn't happen. And so some people use that to say that, there's no way, unless you bring continuous empirical relation to a particular set of objects, there's no way that you can say that those objects are the same objects, i.e. they have the same identity as the objects that you saw the previous time. So they use that as a general way of saying you can't be certain about anything unless you're in empirical relation to them, in an immediate, direct empirical relation to them. So some people try to use that as an argument. Now what he's saying is that he's saying that individual case, you can grant that individual case that yes, that is indeed possible, but the principle that it makes no sense to then try to generalize that to say that there is no persistence of objects without our perception of them. So our perception is, is information or data that comes through our physical senses, so we're engaging with that object in some way. And so he's saying it makes no sense to then, on the basis of the single argument, to try and generalize to say that none of the objects that we see are persisting through time. So, excuse me, getting a bit dry here. So the way I describe that here is I say the argument is not that in any individual case we guarantee the persistence of the objects when they're unperceived. Okay, that's what I've just tried to say. It is perfectly possible that someone wishing to refute the thesis arranges for the swapping of items in the room with similar ones while we sleep. So it is rather that the general principle of the conceptual persistence of distinct objects, okay, so that our concepts, the idea of distinct objects over time, the persistence of the objects over time when we're not looking at them, must be assumed by the skeptic who seeks to frame an argument that denies the persistence of unperceived objects. So the problem is, what he's trying to say is that you have to assume the concept of an object persisting over time to come up with an argument that says that objects do not necessarily persist over time unless you're looking at them. So he's trying to say that if you can't even get that skeptical doubt off the ground, because a precondition of you generating that skeptical argument is that you have to assume the particular identity of those very same objects over time. So if you grasp that, then you've grasped the essence of the transcendental argument. So Strawson just very elegantly saying there is that the skeptic who's trying to argue against the persistence of objects over time without you looking at them, in the sense this would be like a direct refutation of Berkeley's position, where he was saying that for an object to exist is for it to be perceived. He was very radical idealist in that sense. He said that unless the object unless I'm perceiving that object, in a sense, my mind it was taking Kant to the logical extreme, in a sense of although Berkeley was an empiricist, he was nevertheless an idealist, which is a very unusual combination. And he just says that unless I'm perceiving an object, he wanted to deal with materialism, because materialism was attacking Christianity. It was actually Bishop Berkeley, he was Bishop of somewhere in Ireland, I think. And he wanted to deal with the attack on Christianity by the materialists, people like Hobbes, and so he said the easiest way to deal with that is to delete the concept of material, of matter, of solid, by saying that their things only exist in our mind, and they only, if you like, they're only instantiated or made real when we are perceiving them. And so this is a bit like what Strawson's trying to deal with this argument, because he's saying that you can't generate an argument against material objects, or of there being no material things, without assuming the concept of materiality at all. So So he's saying there that the idea of every material thing at any time being spatially related in various ways, in various times, to every other time. So that's our conceptual scheme. Now he's saying that our precondition of that is the unquestioning acceptance of particular identity in at least some cases of non-continuous observation. So he's trying to say that you cannot generate an argument against the particular identity in cases of non-continual observation, i.e. when you're not looking at it, that things suddenly disappear or disintegrate without having those concepts already there. And so it's powerful. I think it's a powerful argument. I think that's a very convincing. I think we would have. I think most people would agree with Strawson at that level. Where it becomes more interesting. So the reason why I always, in a sense, you can connect it with Kantian thought is, and this is why Strawson would be he was considered a neo-Kantian. He didn't want to follow Kant with Kant's psychological explanation for categories that allow us to. Kant's famous sort of derivation was when he was trying to come up with his transcendentals. He became very psychological in his explanation, and he was saying, well, basically there's a common psychological apparatus that's common to all humanity we have to think in certain categories. Where Strawson didn't want to follow that because that's very controversial, because that's sort of like saying that anybody, regardless of of their ethnic origin, where they live, their experience, that they're all going to think the same way, and that's very implausible. I think nobody wanted really to follow him with that. But what they are happy to follow is to say that somehow the mind is involved in the mind is involved in the knowledge generating process, that there are objects that are persisting in the mind, and we have concepts of those objects. So if I move on, and I think this is worth. So there is that I think the point I was going to jump to there was which this is when you're trying to follow a list, it's easy to miss out. So the idea of there being that you have to think in a certain way, and that we can't help not to think in a certain way, is the neo-Kantian sort of like thought. What transcendental arguments, I think most philosophers would be prepared to grant that if you're prepared to accept the validity of transcendental arguments, now there are some philosophers who don't want to accept the validity of transcendental arguments, normally because they don't understand them, and they don't understand what they're trying to prove, because they tend to get a rather how can I put it, a rather negative response to transcendental arguments in analytical circles, because you're dealing in some ways you're dealing with the mind and how the mind works and the structure of your knowledge, and you're not dealing with individual items of analysis that analytic philosophers tend to emphasize. So continental philosophers have historically been much more involved in sort of transcendental arguments. So people like McDowell were very influential in bringing, and Wittgenstein and Strawson were people who were quite analytic in their approach, and so they don't get stuck down in sort of like the dense arguments of, say, a Heidegger or a Sartre, who are dealing with. They've got a different style of language, which some of the transcendentalists, rightly or wrongly, have sort of been characterised in that continental tradition, a very dense, difficult to understand language. Whereas sort of the more analytic transcendentalists, people like Searle and Putnam and Wittgenstein Strawson, they're much easier to understand. You can understand the sort of like the basic analytic framework that they're bringing to the problem. Excuse me again. So this idea, that is what you might call there's an option A transcendental argument. There was a very interesting paper written by I'll have to look that up again. It seems to have gone straight out of my head. But the Anthony, what was it? I've got his first name there. What is it? But he made use of, he made a distinction between what you would call option A transcendental arguments, which are conceptual in nature, and what you would call ontological transcendental arguments with ontological significance, which basically means that you're saying that the world really is the way that I have to think. So there's quite a fundamental distinction there between that. So you can, if you're talking about option A arguments, you're talking about, well, my concepts are, we have to think this particular way, and so my concepts say that the world is this particular way. Whether that's quite different though from saying that the world really is a particular way. So the option A arguments are saying that we have to think a particular way. Option B arguments are saying but the world really is this way. So option B arguments have got ontological significance, or they're talking about metaphysics. They're saying that the world really is this way. But you can see that that's quite different from saying that we just have to think about the world a particular way. And this is what Kant, in a sense, this was Kant's big division of reality into the noumenal and the phenomenal world. He's saying that we have to deal with the world the way the world appears to us in the phenomenal realm. Kant believed that there was a place where objects exist as they are in themselves, which he called the noumenal realm. Certain objects that he said that anything that's in the noumenal realm is only appears to us in the phenomenal realm, but we don't know it as it is in the noumenal realm. We're cut off from what the object really is like. We're just limited to how it appears to us in the phenomenal realm. And so he put objects such as God, the positive God. He said that God was in the noumenal realm, and we are cut off from knowing God as he really is in himself. We, or him, her, herself, or itself. We're only going to experience as God has appeared to us in the phenomenal realm. So he was trying to deal with the skepticism of Hume, and so he divided our experience into, or divided reality into the noumenal and the phenomenal. And so the most famous criticism of transcendental arguments was made by somebody called Stroud in response to Strawson, and he was saying that the most transcendental arguments can do is to demonstrate the conceptual necessity of that we have to think in a particular way. Now, that though is still a really substantive and important place to get to, in the sense of actually demonstrating that we have to think in a particular way. It's still quite a powerful sort of like terminus. But if you are, the reason why some have taken issue with that, of course, in my particular work, I'm specifically dealing with, well, how does this relate to the belief in God and the necessity of belief in God, and can you demonstrate objectively? That's the prize of the argument, is there is an objective proof for the existence of God.